We are live. Well, welcome everybody, and welcome to this session. You know, have you ever heard the thing about it's a run sale thing? It says what it does on the tin. Well, that's what this session is going to be about. Hopefully, you're going to walk away with understanding what's next in this area. And we have a great panel today, and you're going to have to listen to me a little bit as well. So I'll just get on with that part of it, and then bring our panel in. But one of the things that I recently read, which was very interesting, was by Geoffrey Moore. Many of you will know of the thought leader Geoffrey Moore, and he was the guy who wrote Crossing the Chasm, among other books. And he's basically saying, this Gen AI stuff, we've seen it before. It's adopting new technology, right? That's all, folks. So there are three phases as a business that you need to look at. You optimize your operating model, you upgrade your infrastructure, and then you'll revisit your business model. Well, what does that mean? Let's go a little bit in. So the first part, Gen AI will expand that kind of window, that aperture, if you like, to include those that demand creating specific situation-specific text, right? We've all been doing that sort of thing. You're answering FAQ, or you're just trying to get that difficult email. It'll help you with that. And maybe it nudges somebody to take a call, so use it for reach out, or checks in on users from time to time. So you have it as some kind of customer service. So it's got that textual element to it that it helps you. So expediting this, it's a no regrets move, right? It's a simple, little risk involved, and you get a modest ROI. Next phase, upgrading your infrastructure model. While you're likely to start, using Gen AI systems that are out of the box, Microsoft, Google, Amazon, ChatGPT, whatever it is, as you get deeper into it, you will want to have your own Gen AI models, what they call retrieval augmented generation, right? Which taps into what your business does and the in-house knowledge stores and external stores that are related to your business. So it gets a little bit more specific to what your business does. And then the third step is going back to the business model. So, AI is going to materially disrupt the way business is done in your industry potentially. So what is your business model, and how will you evolve that? So I just thought maybe, Philippe, we can just pass that on in the chat a little bit later for people to have a look at. But it got us thinking. Many of us here, have dealt with S curves, and when the myriad of new tech and how you adopt it in your organization, there's got to be a lot of mini S curves, isn't there? One part of your business is adopting it this quick. Another part is way ahead. Another part is way behind, the laggard group, as we call it, right? So how is that going to happen in your organization? How quick is this kind of new tech going to be adopted? Well, today we're going to talk a bit about that. I wanted to give you that as a kind of, hey, let's look at some visuals and set the tone a little bit. We're going to talk about AI and M&A, if I could say both of those acronyms. We'll delve into what AI tech is considered as a must for a competitive edge and long-term market leadership. How companies are grappling with that decision to develop in-house, so build, or acquire established solutions to stay competitive, right? Let me introduce our panel. So first up is Ian. So Ian Evans has a background in software development originally. Previously has been VP at VMware, Airwash, Managing Director at OneTrust, and currently CEO at XDM. You're very welcome, Ian.
Absolute pleasure to be on the panel, Dave.
Thanks, Ian. Andrea Bellista has had many roles in the audio and multimedia sphere, including management roles at Binary Sonori, audio director at Keyword Studios, and has recently, built his own startup in expressive voice, and it's called VoiceSeed, and you may have heard of that company. And, quick one for you, Andrea is also a really good singer. Andrea, very welcome.
Thank you. Very welcome to everybody. Glad to be here. Thank you, Dave.
Jane Nemkova is a very experienced thought leader in AI language industry, has been pivoting about in the last couple of years in looking at inclusive, sustainable fintech ecosystems for healthcare with Vue. Very welcome. Great to see you, Jane.
Thank you, Dave. Yes, happy to be here.
And Olga Blasko is a growth strategist with many years of experience at senior positions, board level, and currently is M&A principal partner at Line People Global. Olga, great to see you.
Yes, great to see you too. And great to see everybody. Thank you.
S-curves, everybody. How do you see this world? Where are you on your S-curves? Ian, talk to us about S-curves.
Yeah, I think you raise an interesting point, and I think Geoffrey Moore's position of crossing the chasm and his S-curves have been really kind of present with us for many, many years now, of trying to adopt technology, trying to adopt and embrace situational change. I spend a lot of my time looking at AI externally and internally, and I think it's important from our perspective, especially in the sort of the language and localization space, about what the impacts of generative AI will have, and where we can embrace it, where we can add value through localization. But I also have to look at that from our own business as well. So I have to look at things that are embracing self-service. I have to look at how I can get more productivity from my engineering team, and that's one of my kind of really big areas of focus right now. I also looked, you made a point about sort of proactive management of maybe customer engagement models and customer success or consulting models, and about how you should be engaging. And I also looked at some of those as well. Now, interestingly, I didn't put that into the laggard bucket because it was definitely very ahead of the game. I felt that there are certain things you can do and you can really leverage, and there are certain things that you've got to get your house in order before you can truly leverage. And my view is to truly leverage around the sort of customer account management success model. All of those processes need to be really well ironed out, and you need to have all your supporting things around you of SLAs and documents and engagements and as much automation as you can get. If you layer AI onto that, I think you can really gain a great experience. But then that AI also reaches into other departments. And I think that's the challenge that you have to look at. Having said that, when you think about engineering and development, there are lots of stats out there right now that there are 10x improvements of productivity. And when you think about what some of these tools are doing, they're helping us with the documentation of developers' code. It's laborious. When you write code, nobody wants to write down also what it does. And if you're using nearshore facilities, then they're trying to write it down in English versus whatever their mother tongue is. Then you have to write test scripts, unit test scripts, system test scripts, regression test scripts. And a lot of the Gen AI can help us with those. So actually in a meeting this morning with my engineering team, I just said, if we could get 20 to 25% improvement with Gen AI, that's huge. It is massive. And it allows us to focus on other areas. So it doesn't, you can look at that. I've seen case studies of very big multinationals looking to downsize their teams in the last 30 days using Gen AI and productivity gains. From my perspective, it gives me more horsepower. I can start to do more quickly. And I think that's really one of the key factors now of what do you want to achieve with the Gen AI program? Are you trying to cut costs? Are you trying to improve the capacity you have without increasing your costs? And if I look at, just a quick cost example, it's 30,000 for a Gen AI engineering tool set, roughly. That's almost one nearshore developer, and I can get 25% of my 80 to 100 person team. That's a huge uplift for the money. And I think those are the areas I look at. So lots of these little mini S curves, you're absolutely right. Some of them I don't think I'm ready to embrace because I need to have a bit more predictive on the outcome, but some of them very ready to embrace both internally and externally.
Brilliant. And that kind of learning point you mentioned, Dean, that, in order to get those gains, there is a certain learning aspect to it, right? With the developers understanding how to do the right kind of prompt engineering so that the code is tight or whatever it is. And that's sort of part of your investment and the ROI calculation, right? There
is. And I think you have to look at it with a lens that suits your company. So for example, if you're writing brand new code, there probably is a 10x productivity gain. If you're refactoring old code and you're porting it from an old language to a more modern language set, you're not going to get anywhere near that level of gain. But if you only get a 2x productivity gain, it's a huge productivity gain. It just, if you could do everything twice as fast, why wouldn't you do it? So So this is where, and there are a lot of people that doubt, oh, you can do this, but you'll have to do so much more work later. Well, like we're getting a 2x productivity gain without really changing the team. So we have all that time to do it as well. So it's trying to avoid some of those excuses. It is time to embrace in certain parts of our business.
Right. And what you can see now is the gain factors on the current S curve, but maybe some new Gen AI gives you. So if you don't dip your toe in the ocean, folks, you're not going to get up to your waist, I think is what you're hearing here.
And look, whatever you think the answer is today, it'll be different in 30 days' time. Every time I try to frame up Gen AI, my frame moves very quickly, right? It's constantly moving. So I just think it is a dip in your toe, have a pessimistic view of where you're going to get to, and be pleasantly surprised with all of your outcomes.
Great point. Thanks, Ian. And Andrea, from your perspective in S-curves, you're in that expressive voice area. You're dealing with AI every day. How do you see this?
Yeah, thank you, Dave. I see that things are really proceeding step by step. And when you go for the first step, then it takes a while to, let's say, understand exactly what's happening, and then is boosting, and then re-leverage on the next level. So we have seen recently some good improvements for having API sounding much better. At the same time, the problem now is, and then the technology is there, and how can I use it? How can I use it in a different way, changing the workflow? Okay, so I see that going on step by step, we are at the level in which now the adoption curve is slowing down since we are impacting the workflow. And this means, okay, how can I produce better with same resources or maybe different resources, okay? And this is impacting the skills of the people. When this is impacting the skills of the people, you need to have the new technology, the new workflow with the platform, and people that need to learn how to get the best in the shortest time possible. So this is a mixture of conditions that, of course, can slow down a little bit. Then when you find the good level, then this can re-accelerate, but you need to recreate a kind of a standard behavior in that level of, let's say, workflow and industry. Of course, at the moment, once you see that the voices can be more, is nicer, then you say, okay, now it can be more expressive, but how can I control it? And if you want to go to the next level, not just you need to have expressiveness, but you need to control the timing. So how the more you escalate, okay, in the value chain, producing content that is more articulated and more expressive, you need to also give the challenge of how you can control it. So this is basically mixing different skills, engineering skills, studio skills, linguistic skills, and this is impacting a new layer of how can I go into the next level. So we are basically bridging two different level of the S curves. This is what is my view. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and in the sort of dive-in analogy, you've started on the 3-meter board. You've done a couple of flips. You got confident up to the 10-meter platform, and so higher tariff, right? And comes with that, right? Excellent. Thanks, Andrea. Jane, what are your thoughts on S curves?
Yeah, I mean, so I guess there's many angles that you could start to kind of analyze, like, how does this affect organizations? I guess it affects it if they themselves are ones that are producing some kind of AI product suite or tool set or something like that. It's also affecting companies who generally are in different businesses and using some of those tools themselves to do things like what Ian was talking about in terms of optimizing your resources and things of that nature. And then in the greater context of, M&A, there's lots of different, angles and topics that I'm sure we'll start to get into. But I think what's interesting from my point of view on how this affects a business's maturity model is really in the savviness of being able to research everything and look at, as much as you possibly can to adopt those, improvements that are happening in the market that are so frequent, it's almost mind-boggling. And it's the reason that people are confused and get confused easily and orienting themselves on what the role of AI would be, as a tool. and then kind of seeing how that's fleshing out in the market. So particular to generative AI, part of the challenge is there's a lot of money getting poured into generative AI potential technologies and solutions, and a lot of excitement around that. But the use cases in terms of practical applications of those tools in the market is very much TBD. If you're a student who needs to write an essay, then there's a use case for ChatGPT to be useful and helpful for summarizing things for you or writing an essay or something like that. But do you really trust that if you want to use this for coding? Do you really want to trust that? So basically, in terms of business maturity, I think having a culture of innovation / being able to research and have a team that actually looks at those things, digests it, figures out like where it could be applicable in optimizing, cost, time, quality, the usual kind of business criteria. And then also, in terms of the people, how important the people are. So yes, people get very caught up in the narrative of, okay, this can reduce jobs in a particular area, but it's also actually pointing to a direction of the emphasis of how important people are within an organization who know how to evaluate these things, but also how to apply them and how to set up what Andrea was talking about in terms of processes that now you've got to create and identify a standard for something, whatever that is, whether it's in how you manage people, how you manage your product development, et cetera. So I think that the pressure that generative AI is giving to companies and their business maturity model is putting a huge emphasis on, the ability to take in new tools and tech and be able to assimilate it in different ways. And then also the people that you have on staff may not be the same people you would have had 10 years ago that you would need in the next 10 years. Oh, Dave, sorry, I can't hear you.
You're muted.
Yeah, I was listening to you intently. Thanks, Jane. And before we move into, what's the current strategy that you're taking or potentially will take in the tech landscape? Olga, what are your thoughts on this? And maybe bring us into that conversation on the tech landscape.
Yeah, I mean, like the tech landscape. I mean, I was listening to them, and I mean, and it is true that these S curves are happening at, in more kind of rapid succession. And from my perspective, it's always that kind of in percentages 10, 20, 50, and then the last 20 with like the laggards. And then there's always the ones that are pushing for the moonshot thinking, and then everything else happens in succession. And I think that we've seen these S curves before for sure, but now I think that the challenge is that you're going to have a lot of people trying to embrace and others trying to defend themselves from that. But at the same time, because of the way things are advancing, I think that the competitive advantage that you can actually gain from releasing something is debatably short or shorter than ever before. And that means that either you launch something that is not perfect but will capture in the market, that will capture a good piece of it, and then you can thanks to what you've gained, you can actually be at the product leadership and bring people along and get that kind of advantage. Or you can basically get into the law of diminishing returns, be late, and then play catch up all the time. And in the meantime, you'll have a lot of people that will try to come up with things to outpace you and beat you in the race. And this is why, I mean, I think that in terms of investment, things are being put under the microscope a lot, because not all that glitters is gold. I mean, and I think that there is that kind of discerning eye that goes into, are these the people that are gonna get ahead and capture market? I mean, if we fund this, I mean, are we gonna find out that there's somebody else doing the same thing and they release, like, look at what what happened with ChatGPT and Bard. I mean, like, ChatGPT being far from perfect, was released and was launched out there. We were having fun with it. I mean, I was enjoying testing it, having debates with myself. Give me 10 reasons against what I'm thinking. And that was kind of useful. But of course, I realized that, like, the model was had this fluency, but I mean, clearly has ways to go. But they released. They went ahead and released. They made that call.
They got it out there. Yeah. And so, Ian, is it, value? Are we in that world where it's got to create value, or you got to get it out there? You're coming from a different sector, industry base, and coming into this. And what do you see as a tech strategy with value in mind and just releasing content or product?
Sorry.
Okay, let's try it again. So they're both value. The build buy conundrum, I think, is still the value conversation. So if you're innovating product that's kind of just ahead of the curve of something like a Gen AI, then you don't want to be buying something right now. I would say you're building something to be released. But if you're trying to buy something to catch up or fill a gap in your products that's actually hurting you, or you can buy something that changes the total addressable market of the solution that you are presenting to somebody, or it gives you additional personas that you engage with, essentially, they have to be valued different ways. So this is the sort of, from the sort of private equity world, it drives the NRR number, which is this net retention of revenue, which is how do I get more dollars for every dollar I have in my install base, which means I need to sell more modules. So if I can do a land and expand style process, every customer I have, if I could get $2 for every customer I have, it just magnifies that. So that's the usual kind of piece that you have to look at. However, I do believe that when you buy something that all the glitters isn't gold, sometimes there's just glitter scattered on it. And you have to look at what you've just bought, and you have to figure out how fit for purpose it is, because generally you don't buy something that just is right. I mean, that it overlaps, right? So there's always something that conflicts and overlaps. The technologies aren't aligned, the processes aren't aligned, and when you buy a company, generally the people aren't aligned. So you then have to start thinking about, I mean, this becomes a change management program then. So instead of building something and trying to get something out the door, which has a lead time and a quality issue, and then you're going to release things in phases, which customers will kind of get used to, then you end up buying something, and you have to bring these minds together to make something happen. And that all comes down to how you manage customers and your SLAs and looking like one company and bringing brands together. And I mean, that it's, it's a challenge, and I live in this world a lot. So I think this is where you can overlook the complexity of buying by thinking you've simply fixed the problem, that you've got a hole and you've plugged the hole. Actually, that's the easy part. It's the complexity behind the scenes. It's your business process blueprints, integrating different cultures, bringing companies together, and ultimately giving the customer value. And the goal of this is to get there faster, much faster, and also maybe outmaneuver your competitors in that pace. And if you don't buy them, then somebody else might buy them, and then that's a different situation.
It's really, really interesting, because do you feel, coming in from the outside, do you feel there is some level of reticence to buy and just push through, and to your point, build out that ecosystem, because building it would have taken you too long, or it just made sense to buy? And
I think this is certainly in the localization space. It's a very fragmented technology space, and there is room for more consolidation to give customers a choice, so they can come to a vendor and buy more of a modular solution that fits their needs. But you can also achieve that through partnering. So I think you don't have to overlook partnering, because there's also very, very good equitable partnerships. And we didn't talk, there's build and buy. There's a third piece of the triangle, which is partner. And you can have very successful partnerships that are equitable between two companies serving a customer. You can make sure that there's a primary in your partnership, and actually overcome a lot of these issues as well. So I do think there's a huge value in that. And then at that point, you're looking at driving value very, very quickly and aligning behind the scenes integration technology. People don't like that because they say, I don't own it, but actually that's just that's a state of mind. You got to get over that piece sometimes.
Yeah.
Thanks, Ian. And Andrea, build or buy tech strategy thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I was just restarting from what Ian was saying, since from our perspective, we are building a tool. We are not doing a service. So partnering is an essential component how we can create a full service. So we are a component of something bigger. Okay, and this is, of course, is something that is definitely something we'll look into very carefully. Okay, and a good partnership with good potential use cases can really, say, let us grow very quickly. At the same time, we're noticing that you need to find exactly the proper client. So for us, we are strongly B2B. We have seen a lot of B2C in the API audio space and voice space, and that has been, say, good improvements. At the same time, now that everybody knows the technology is there, you need to change the workflow, as we said before. Change the workflow means that you need a platform, and then you need to have a kind of general model, what we usually call LLM. And sometimes LLM are cool, sometimes are not hitting the quality that you would like to expect. So, like in the LLM, okay, space in which we can have, let's say, basically general programs and general narrative models, we can definitely go to the customizing things. When you're customizing things, you can create very good solution on use cases, optimizing the workflow, and at the end of the day, optimizing the time that is taken to create 1 minute of audio. So all these components need to go all together, okay? And it's extremely important, okay, to put and to have this kind of really element all together. But I see general API things as a kind of LLM, cool. But then when you have to do something specific, you need to have an SLM or, let's say, a very specific voice model or prosody model. The difference is that, do you have a customizable platform or you do not have a customizable platform? This can help to standardize the workflow. So who is learning to understand how to do a different workflow with a little trigger of customization can really redefine the barrier and unlocking, like in a game, the new level. So it's a race to understand where are the gold mines. Okay, we are basically talking about of contents and building platform and solution to get there and to let them to voice the unvoiced, targeting what has not been possible to do at certain level of quality in an efficient way. So this is basically, sorry, maybe I don't want to go too specific, but I mean, we are talking with a professional audience. So I let myself go into specifics since I think that many of you can understand what I'm saying. Yeah.
Yeah, very interesting. So, yeah, and I think we're going to come back to that a little bit, that there's going to be a path for the professional output. There's going to be a path for other levels of output as well, right? I picked up from what you were saying there. Jane, when we think about stories and M&A, I know during prep, you're giving us some thoughts on this. And what are your thoughts on that? Some stories, buy and build as well. What are your thoughts?
Yeah. I mean, it just career-wise, I mean, I was a build person, like, just, find the value, build that around your customer. You're going to win every time, provided that you have time to do that and that other people in the mix are not going to get to your customers, your base, your value faster than you. You can do it better, So what's one of the things that was striking me in the comments from everybody is there's a dimension in the M&A side now that it's changed in my mind a bit because of just time, speed, the ability to get to market, to kind of dominate and monopolize a certain value there. Now that's in the market in a different way than it was actually a couple of years ago, and definitely, further back. But for now, time is an element that you may not be able to afford, and that will forge a strategy, or should forge your strategy on acquiring something quickly and implementing, as Ian was rightfully pointing out, kind of a major change management effort, and it's really going to be about how quickly you can get that to happen. and get good at doing that in the acquisition. So, where time wasn't as big of a factor, I think, in the build versus buy kind of element, I do think that that's an issue now, and certainly in the language space, and particularly in the like data space as well, because we talk about the tech, but the data is actually a major, major factor in what companies are doing and what their value can be and how quickly they can get to market with things. All of the customizations that Andrea was talking about in whatever you do end up, deploying is a really important factor to address the customer value while you're also doing all these other things. So the M&A kind of perspective, I think the time element would be something that I think is a different component now than it was, and actually needs to be paid attention to very, very carefully. I think, the partnership topic is also interesting because we're forced to be partners now, whether we want to really admit that or not. We're kind of forced to with very large AI companies, very large data companies, very large cloud solutions. All of these things are part of the landscape now that weren't. That also puts kind of a pressure on what gets commoditized. So when looking at, the value of a company and whether you're able to kind of move in and you can manage these other elements of the people and the change and leadership and culture and all that, it definitely is impacted by this. So in terms of what, M&A kind of build versus buy, I would say I'm much more of the opinion that buying has a value to it now because of the time component, and that there's an urgency, a sense of urgency in racing towards the ultimate value that you want to provide to your customers. And you still have to have the value there. It doesn't mean that because you're buying that you're not, you're getting out of the, need to kind of provide value to your customers. If that's not there, it's very hard to unify, so you have to isolate that and identify it and carry that through any kind of strategy you end up deploying. But basically, I think time is a very big factor that we don't have as much of now.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, and Olga, just currency is time, and value has been mentioned multiple times already. Money has been mentioned as well. If you blink, what can you burn? Tell us some of your thoughts and stories in M&A and where it is now.
It's time and capital allocation. I mean, that's the way that I would summarize it. And I think that nowadays, I mean, I totally agree with what Jane just said. I mean, I normally say that you blink and you've spent $6 million and you wonder what does that give you? I mean, and that kind of return, I mean, when you evaluate it, I mean, I have faced situations in the past where, hard decisions have to be made. It's like after having poured money into something and it gives you a marginal gain in the efficiency or the net profit of the company, it's kind of like, I mean, would we not be better off perhaps acquiring something that give us that leap forward? I mean, maybe, we don't have those core competencies. We're trying really hard. I mean, we have really good people, but I mean, these people have advanced faster in the meantime, and you need to really consider. And I've seen companies that have been building for years, and now they're buying, or they are licensing, or they are partnering because they don't want to face that cycle. And also, you need to think that there is always an underestimation. I mean, and I've seen that happen again and again and again over the years, at board meetings when you're discussing, well, I mean, like we underestimated the cost of building and then maintaining and then fixing and then deploying, and everything gets underestimated. And then when you're looking at, well, we need to add this much more, there is a point where, the board says, like, there's like, I think that we need to make a call. And I've seen that happen again and again over the years, even when technology was a little bit more, rudimentary. And like the return, like the promise, I remember when we were still talking about, SMT, and NMT was a dream, and they were like, yeah, we're gonna save 40%. I mean, all these claims, and then I've seen entire technology teams being basically let go, as in, we can't sustain this. This is not sustainable. Like the investment that we're making, it's hugely experimental. we are gaining a lot of knowledge and everything else, but there is a time that you need to make a call. So I think that companies that have gotten ahead were the ones that were looking at things from an agnostic perspective, and they were kind of saying, what do we need here and who does what? It's okay if I don't have the core competency to do this. These other team can actually do it. So that's one thing. And then the other thing is, to believe that you have finally cracked something that nobody else is going to crack. When you fall into the trap of your own echo chamber, it's very dangerous, because you are at, nearing the edge of your own kind of like private precipice. And somebody needs to come and sometimes kind of rescue you from kind of getting too close to the edge. And that cash burn I've seen again and again and again, and I still see it today.
But at the same time, there's a success factor here in terms of inorganic growth. What do you see as potential success factors that are private, and is that changing nowadays?
I think there's I think you have to build your business with an organic growth plan. So the way I run our business is that we have an organic growth plan, and that's the one I set with the board, and that's how I build the organization, and that's my organic growth plan. Then I have an aspirational plan, which has inorganic growth, and inorganic growth can be whatever number you want to dial it in. If you want to double or triple the size of the company, you can double and triple the size of the company. But you have to then think about, at some point, you also need the cash. So when you're thinking about growing at that rate, cash is definitely not cheap these days. So then you have to think about how you run the business, and you have to service the debt. So when you're servicing the debt, these debt rates are high. And as Olga just said, that generally doesn't lead to a company with enough money in the bank to usually buy something that's meaningful. When you're buying something that's going to double, triple the size of your company, it's a meaningful investment. With a high interest rate, a high burden on your EBITDA and your profit margins. So then you have to think about, really, it's an accretive style acquisition. So you need to generate cash savings from day zero or day one. Day zero is how I like to think about it. So everybody's very open and honest about it. But that's a different type of process to maybe a technology tuck-in. So there's all these different ways. I think if you try to put it all down on a piece of paper, you'd end up with different types of process. It's like, am I trying to fix a gap in a product that I've got to get to market quickly? Am I looking at addressing a TAM issue or a persona issue in my sales cycle? Am I thinking of really just growing my revenue basis to become a much more critical impact company, and therefore driving a bigger platform? And therefore, how am I going to really fund that? And then you've got to run your business in a way that if I'm going to take on that debt, I have to really reshape everything in my business to service it. And I was talking to a couple of other incubator style companies, and the world has changed probably in the last 30 months, 36 months, where the cost of borrowing has gone through the roof. And also, it's no longer about the multiples of your revenue anymore. It's about your rule of 40. And it's your multiples of revenue and the multiples of your profitability. And I was talking to one incubator company, and they said that they don't even talk to organizations now unless it's 60% profits. But 60% profit companies aren't growing organically, because they have to cut their cloth according to 60% profits. That's a hard thing to get to, especially if you're a small tech organization, unless you're a huge organization and you can figure out how to absorb those costs. So again, these all play different factors. And I do think if we played this 2 years ago, 3 years ago, 6 months ago, or in 6 months' time, we'd end up with slightly different versions of this, because this again is also changing. There's another couple of S-curves on just, how do I buy companies? Why should I buy companies? How do I service those companies?
Yeah.
Brilliant. Yeah, so it's just continual change, and you have to just be almost, part of the game, the poker game, so to speak, to actually see how it's changing. Because if you're outside, perhaps you don't. We're going to do some fast, so one-line answer questions if you can, right? And you can just raise your hand, jump in here. So, $1 million question: should you buy AI tech? If you're in position to buy a company, should you buy AI tech? Who wants to answer that? One line. Ooh, no one's showing their hand on that one. So
let me do a very quick thing. I almost think that AI tech shouldn't be called out as something separate. It's part of your roadmap, and therefore, if we treat it as your product evolution, then the answer is in how you're trying to close the gaps of product to your customer value. That's how I think about it, and I'm almost getting a little bit frustrated that we talk about roadmaps of products and then we talk about our AI roadmap. I'm like, isn't that just part of the roadmap?
It's just a roadmap, yeah. Good.
Jane? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I guess part of it is what you're doing. You probably have to be looking at that. You have to be doing it in some way if you're not already. So if it requires acquiring a company that's doing it, I guess it does if you can't do it on your own.
Yeah. Yes, I think that it's very important to understand what is your customer base, what the client are asking for, and to find a good window for, let's say, have a very fast return on investment. So if you are able to detect that your clients are, let's say, consistently going in one direction, they're asking you something, and to have, okay, not just a partnership or something more in a short time, that could be reasoning, and it has to last some time more than the usual quick evolution of the market. But yeah, this is another element that we are already talking about, that the speed of the changes of the market require a different attention to catch the acquisition window, since the strategy need to evolve. And also we are seeing that there's a time for growth and a time of consolidation. So I see that we are a kind of a spring of AI in which there's new AI things that are blossoming, maybe a little bit too early to buy something, but to try and experiment how the things are going, maybe to do some partnership to try if it's work, and if it's really creating value, and we have a good perspective to reach good result in a short time, then maybe go deeper. So that's the kind of thing.
Stay up to speed, but don't install the service pack until everyone else has, because it might just crash your system, right? A bit of that. Hey, let's do some snap questions, right? So one line answers where we can. Here's one for you. What is the most difficult topic to discuss with investors these days? Value, Ian?
Missing your profit targets.
Right.
And also projection of the next 3 or 4 years. Right. Projection are definitely always more and more complicated, since you have incumbent that can cross and kill you in the meantime. So you need to really understand, okay, how fast you need to go. So the good investment is the investment that you can, let's say, let you give them enough resources to get on that island before the others, and then expand. I would say land and expand. Land and expand systematically, quickly, with a short, let's say, battle, not long.
Back to what Ian was saying about modularization, right? That it's just iterative all the time. Okay, next question. How are valuations changing? And I see some questions coming in from the audience. I'll add those in as well. Thank you. Valuations, how are they changing?
I think, the kind of popularity of tech enablement is being redefined in that valuation. And what does that actually mean? And it's a complex problem in a way, because, some companies outwardly are purporting to be tech enabled, right? And then when, investors or due diligence starts, they realize, well, maybe it's not as much the case. And, I think that goes back to kind of the position that your tech philosophy is really about, but also it goes back to the importance of the people. And if you overlook that part, then you're kind of missing what the future focus is going to end up being. Not that the tech part isn't important and your ability to kind of adapt and adjust, but then it's really a question of like valuation as it relates to what you offer as tech enablement, and then how you're leveraging and using it, why it's unique to you, and what other people may or may not be able to do there. And then kind of going back to your previous question, sales. It comes down to good old-fashioned sales. How quickly can you get to market? What is your path to revenue on every single aspect of utilizing that asset that you just purchased and being able to sell? So again, that goes back to a people question, and the value of companies, I think, will in the future kind of shift more to honing in on what's the true value of the human in a tech-enabled kind of position.
Good. Yeah. Ian, do you want to jump in?
I was going to say, I think also not taking your eye off the ball. So M&A is exciting. We all love it. Dead deal fees are expensive, and you have to factor in the fact that you may not be successful during M&A. So always think about whether it's successful or whether it fails. There's no such thing as a cheap acquisition. They're always way more expensive than you ever think, and you've got to get the best outcome, best team for the customer. So I think there's just a bit more planning and thought. I'm going to go back to my original question. My original comment about you can also test your M&A strategy with partnerships. There's nothing stopping you partnering with somebody while you think about joining forces and acquiring, if it makes sense also. And I've done a number of those over the years.
Yeah. But I mean, one of the things that I find more challenging is that the technology is becoming complicated, projections are becoming complex to be done, and promises are not easy to be maintained. So to have a good alignment with who is buying and who is selling, and try to really have a medium-term strategy, considering the value of the people, the impact of the process that can be done, that's very important. This can be helpful to set up a reasonable value, also because the things are changing so quickly, as we said before. It's difficult to have also a real technical due diligence that is able to catch what you are buying. And maybe you are buying A, but you find, oh my God, under this other stone, that's a flower. So that's the other things that you need to discover, how you can find it before. Who can see it just behind the tree? So I think it's particularly intriguing to understand alignment, tech, expectation, and time. Yes.
Brilliant. Another quick question for you. Actually, Edward has a question in chat. Thanks, Edward. When you're looking at a company for M&A, do you look at their organic growth model, or do you look at other things to be part of your decision? Yeah. Who wants to take that?
Absolutely. Absolutely, you do. I mean, like when you're looking to acquire a company, you need to make sure that can grow. I mean, if you are buying something that does not grow or does not add value, it's a bad acquisition. I mean, and sometimes, I mean, like just going back to the previous question and the comments of my colleagues here, you must never forget about the rationale of the acquisition. What is the rationale of this acquisition? What is it supposed to give me that I don't have, or that I covet, or that it's part of my goals? I mean, and a company that has been acquiring companies in order to add to their portfolio, their expertise, or their geography coverage, but does not grow organically. I mean, in proper due diligence, that shows, because you strip out the acquisitions and you see that the growth is flat, or perhaps has declined even in some of the top accounts. So like looking at the organic growth model is extremely important. Looking at the segmentation, what customer segments are they addressing, and are those customer segments going to give you growth? Because if some of those segments are going to stagnate, I mean, like you need to factor that into the value that acquisition will bring.
Yeah, look, I couldn't agree more. When you run your company, you're looking at your growth, you're looking at your cost, and you're looking at your profitability. When you buy a company, there's a business plan that sits alongside that. And when you're buying a company, it's not something that happens within 30 days. So actually, you have an opportunity to be thinking about their business plan, and are they growing their revenue? Are they maintaining their customers and churning contracts? How sticky is the solution, and what's the profitability? And if you start seeing, you'll create a multiple on an initial conversation, so then you'll end up with your acquisition cost or the buy price. You're going to then look at the business plan, and are they actually hitting that plan? And if they're not, you're going to have to go back and have a whole conversation about the price. because ultimately it's going to start devaluing. So it's about focus as well. So if you are being acquired, hitting that plan is the most important thing you'll ever do. Probably more important than upsetting some of the M&A teams about being late with bits of diligence. And if you're acquiring companies, it's exactly the same thing. Not deviating away from your plan, because then your investors or your board are going to look at that and say, well, actually, I don't know if you're able to acquire a company right now because you're distracted. So those things are still absolutely the 101s that we have to get done right.
Yeah. Let me add something, since one of the things is the rationale of why you're buying is definitely important. Also, to have a clear idea about the level of integration that what you're buying has to have in your infrastructure, and how you set the earn-out expectation, and how the acquisition can impact the earn-out, and the availability of the time of the owners, of the sellers, to be in a new environment, focusing on organic growth for their specific brand, or integrating to other component of the larger group. So this has to be, say, balanced very accurately, and try to really build a system by which you really gain what you are expecting for.
Yeah, and I think that the organic growth question is kind of interesting in the sense that probably what's happening in M&A right now, or that should be happening and being thought about, is not only the organic growth of a current company's, kind of path, but what the organic growth would be in the future after having assimilated, 2, 3, 4 solutions into kind of one. And that's the spark of innovation and thought that you don't see very often in the market, because people are very tied to their past organic growth narrative. So in the M&A space, what's kind of interesting to me is that there are, with coming along with these new needs of what tech is demanding of people, is new opportunities in which the sum can be, kind of greater in a way. And that's, again, it's like part of that equation is time, how quickly you can put these things together and get to market with it ahead of other people coming up, because they'll copy the idea, right? They'll imitate, once that kind of new solution is forged, everybody else kind of wants to join in and take a part of that. And you've also cut, kind of the market into a new, you've created a new like definition now that people can put their heads around. But that's kind of the open playing field right now that kind of M&A is exciting for, is that there can be a new thought about how to grow something organically that isn't part of the past organic growth narrative.
And Jane, on that point, like, is there a point to be made where maybe you will have to M&A your way out of things to get back to value?
Yeah, and I think it's even, some of what Andrea was mentioning of uncovering the hidden gems in those things, and that's kind of the art and science part of this, is that you've got some straight, kind of like here from a business perspective, exactly what Ian was talking about in terms of profitability and EBITDA, like all these like straight elements you're incorporating on and taking on as an organization that you have to factor in. But then there's like this other kind of harder to define aspect of being able to uncover what that potential, is, that if you actually aggregate entities together, you can form as a solution in the new market. And I think that that's the way that everything is looking to go right now, that it's that's how people are going to have to acquire their way out of some of the pickles they're in, and they're going to have to do that. But behind it is, you have to have a vision for how you're going to actually create a new entity, how that offering and that value for the future is going to be addressed. And it's easier said than done for people, so.
Excellent. Well, let's start wrapping up, folks. Right. I'm going to ask you all one last question. It's going to be two-parter, so it's not really one question, right? But it's, what is next in the language industry in terms of AI, M&A, AI? Just give your quick thoughts on that. And, what can we expect then going into 25 and beyond? And we've seen some recent stuff with DeepL, if I can mention them. Are they going to create the next LLM? Give us your thoughts on that. So next in the industry and looking out into 25 and beyond. Ian?
Interoperability, I think, is going to be key. Making sure that anything can talk to anything. I think from a language technology space, and I've said this, Dave, before, headless technology has to be there so that we don't have obstacles to getting localization and translation performed. And do I think that DeepL will become the next LLM? Absolutely. I think that's got to be, that's where I would be pushing. I'm sure that's exactly where they're pushing with their investment.
Brilliant. Thanks, Ian. Jane?
Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, Andrea, go ahead. Yeah.
No, sorry. I was just thinking that this is a $1 million question, Dave. Of course, seeing the future, and definitely there will be new entrants coming in, and they will probably say expand very quickly. But I think that the overall scenario to bring AI to the next level and be able to do the best and super customization of elements would be one component. So from LLMs to SLM, that would be one of the things that will be definitely relevant. And the ability to build and craft solution to expand the client base that you have.
Build and craft, good stuff, Jane?
Yeah, I think so. In the languages space, I see, most companies are falling in the bucket of being services companies, and they have a tough road ahead, right? Because the impact of LLMs and, any kind of, tech solution is going to have a bearing on valuation and all of that stuff that people are kind of concerned about. On the other hand, I think in the future that will only isolate, more importantly, the value of services, which does have a very important value in this whole rethinking the supply chain of the future. And that's where I see, the future potential to be and how that would need to happen. And that's directly related to the advancements in generative AI as it relates to language in particular, among other things. But it really kind of pushes the bar to what defines services companies and what defines tech enablement. And that's like the picture may be kind of, stressful at the moment, but that's where I see a future in that space, and where kind of interesting new thoughts on, the value of people come into the kind of more philosophical questions about this, but the value of that in this entire AI space, that's going to be, not only relevant to the language industry, but to almost every particular domain that people are working in.
Yeah.
Thank you, Jane. And Olga, we've been hearing, time is more of a currency now. Value is mentioned umpteen times. People just there with Jane and before. What are your thoughts on this? Big bets looking out. What are we going to see in this industry?
I see the evolution of the industry going towards professional services. And what I mean is, high value add, where, technology is used to augment humans, but like the element of adding value means that perhaps a machine will have processed, content to the tune of 150 languages and millions of words in, 1 minute. But like the service that you are providing might be somebody taking a look for 5 minutes and say, it's all right. That is gold. And to have that is what we are seeking from a lawyer, or we're seeking from an accountant, where we can operate our own spreadsheets and do our own P&Ls. But we need their seal of approval according to regulations that you don't know, et cetera, and you actually still require that expertise. And I see an evolution towards that. And I think we were talking about it for the last 20 years, and I think that it's really becoming real now. But it's becoming real because technology is bringing us closer to that point, and that is going to mean a change of business models, change of mindset, reskilling, upskilling, and looking at things from a different prism. And I think that work of evolving towards that mindset needed to start 5 years ago, and whoever hasn't embraced it. I mean, like they are, you know, highly advised, you know, to take it seriously.
So
Absolutely.
let's finish as we started. You know, Geoffrey Moore, we spoke about him, operating model, then work on infrastructure model, then the business model. Thanks, Olga, for the last word. Thank you all. Thanks to our panelists, Ian, Andrea, Jane, Olga, for joining us. Great conversation. Hopefully you enjoyed it. We'll see you at the next one. And thanks for joining in. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks,
Well
everybody.
done, Dave. Thank you,
Thank
everybody.
you so much. Hello,
Thank
everybody.
you.
Bye. Thank you. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye. Bye. Bye.
Bye.